Hey Enneagram friend, this is Abby Rodriguez, your certified and IEA accredited Enneagram teacher and coach. In this space, I'll give you a sneak peek into real live coaching sessions and teach you how to apply the wisdom of the Enneagram into your life for personal growth. The invitation each episode is to take on a posture of curiosity about yourself and others, so that you can shift from merely surviving to fully thriving in your everyday life. Visit my website at abbyrodriguez.com and listen into this episode to learn more. In this episode, I share the coaching space with an Enneagram Six that has a desire to better navigate worry and fears that come up in relationships, but also that come up in everyday life. We talk about how type 6s are naturally wired with a greater sensitivity towards potential threats, and the invitation that's there to view our fear response to those threats with more self-compassion. In our coaching conversation, we explore how to manage fear and worry and anxiety, and that's really applicable for everyone, whether you're an Enneagram 6 or not. Okay, friends, let's listen into this conversation with compassion for the 6s in our lives, as well as a curiosity as we're invited into this 6's world for a brief space and time. Well, thank you for being in the coaching space with me. I love getting to have these conversations and just to get to talk through how the Enneagram is showing up in your type structure. So I would love to hear what feels most helpful for us to explore or focus our time on today.
I've really been, I think, dealing with this idea that I need to do some work on my ability to trust other people, which I understand, again, is a pretty big concept. And I'm honestly not so sure where to start.
Yeah.
But I think that has been a thing that has been coming up a lot more and more lately.
Yeah. So when you say trust other people, are there certain spaces or environments, relationships that you're noticing that trust piece coming up most?
I think more recently in my romantic relationships, but I've also noticed that trend essentially my whole life, right? So I think it's just become more apparent that that's a thing that I can work on my side of things, and not just other people are untrustworthy, right? Yeah. In those spaces with regards to trust, are there general themes that come up around things that are easier or more difficult to trust? Like, is it sharing personal information? Is it sharing resources? Is it relying on and depending on them? Like, what are the areas that feel most difficult? It also may be easiest to depend on them in a romantic relationship or a friendship, either way. Yeah, so I think, I guess also this is true of friendships, but maybe to a lesser degree. I think I'm quite comfortable sharing information and trusting in that. I think it's more of the dependability aspect. And having faith or trust that somebody is going to be there when I actually need them, and when it is quite important to me.
Yeah. Have there been moments that you're recalling, even as you say that, when you needed someone to be there and they weren't, that kind of solidified this fear, or is it just kind of a lingering concern that it'll happen?
I think that there have been some instances, but I think it's maybe a mixture of both, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. So even as you talk through this right now, I can hear a little bit in your voice, just, there's feelings that come up around it, right? It's not just an easy intellectual conversation. It's part of you. It's part of your experience. I'm curious what emotion comes up for you as you talk through this.
I think it just, in this moment, I'm feeling all of that, fear, and a disappointment when I think about the specific instances. And also, I guess, when I think about the general lingering anxiety about it, the fear of disappointment. So I think that those two things are quite interlinked for me.
Yeah. So even just taking a moment while you're feeling that, right? I can tell even in your nonverbals, right? You can feel it physically. We talk about emotions as just this heart space, but it's our body too, right? We can feel it. So even if you just take a deep breath right now, I'm curious where you can feel that in your physical sensation. Is there knots in your stomach? Is there kind of this, buzzing sensation in your fingertips? Is there a tightness in your throat? What do you feel in your body even as you are talking through this?
Oh, it feels like there is a brick on my chest.
Yeah.
That is like my most common feeling in this like space and talking
Yeah.
about these things. And also I think maybe just a little bit of the rest of my body becomes quite fidgety to like
Yeah.
relieve that tension that I'm feeling in my chest, I think.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, those are the two physical ways that I'm feeling it.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if you just take a moment, and it's almost offering yourself this kindness of breathing, like when you feel that tightness on your chest and that, the fidgeting. I heard a six call it jangly once. Like she's like, I just feel like my body's jangly. Like I
Oh,
can't.
that's so good. That's so good. Yes. Jangly. Yes.
Yes. And so even just offering yourself this kindness of like, okay, my body's having a reaction and I'm just going to breathe deeply and just give myself a moment to almost deregulate your nervous system because there's just something coming up, right? And we're not
Yeah.
judging it, we're not critical of it. It's just part of how you feel. It's just part of your experience.
And I think right now, like you noticing the physical aspects of it in me is helping me identify these things for later because I think oftentimes what is happening when I'm thinking about this stuff and feeling these emotions is I don't notice the physical things as they come up. So then as it escalates, it becomes quite difficult to like calm myself down and
Yeah.
regulate that.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that is such great awareness. I mean, part of giving ourselves some space to acknowledge what our physical felt sense is that oftentimes if we can bring some awareness to that, we can notice when it's starting small, and sometimes it's because we have habits of checking in with ourselves of like, okay, I know I'm about to talk to this person and they're usually pretty triggering for me, or I'm about to go into this space and I usually feel a little bit worried in this space. But even just to check in and to see, does our body feel jangly? Do we have
Yeah.
this tightness in our chest, this heaviness? And in that, when it's smaller, sometimes even just acknowledging it and naming it of like, okay, I think I'm a little bit worried about this going well, or I think I have some fear that I might disappoint or whatever. When it's smaller and it hasn't kind of flooded our body yet, sometimes even just naming it and breathing can cause that feeling to be honored enough to dissipate.
Mm.
Otherwise, especially for sixes, you get into this headspace where you kind of like reason your way out of not being afraid or reason your way out of not being concerned or talk yourself out of it. But then your body has a totally different story of like, no, actually, we're still pretty concerned about what's happening. And then there's this disconnect. And then it becomes this all of a sudden, like, I got to get out of here. Or I say something that was way more, verbally threatening than I meant it to, or way more sarcastic than I meant it to. And now I have to pick up the pieces of hurting someone's feelings or I'm hurt or whatever it might be. And so kind of checking in and noticing. So how does that land in your experience as I talk through that?
Oh, that seems extremely real. I think, especially in having hard conversations with my partner, that's something that I've been really trying to work on is like noticing when I feel like I'm escalating the situation, because that often then further escalates the situation because I say something a little bit snippy and then he gets defensive and then I get a little bit more defensive. And it's just like this big circle that I have noticed, and I really am trying to do my best to prevent that from starting. But yeah, it's quite difficult because it's quite in my nature
Mm-hmm.
to really like yes, second guess these physical feelings that I'm having, especially because I've always been a quite anxious person. These are always feelings that I've had, and I do a lot of okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable in this moment, but I generally feel uncomfortable, so maybe it's not that bad. And then I keep pushing myself, and yeah, that's when these like pretty negative things that have consequences happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I feel bad and regret it and beat myself up for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's
Yeah.
all of that felt extremely real and relevant to me.
Yeah. And the thing is, there are aspects of this that are true for all the 9 types. It's almost these ways that we don't trust our experience, and then we self-sabotage, and we make it almost, we dig this hole for us that's so hard to get out. And the start of it was actually that we just were ignoring what was happening for us. And so in that, as you can kind of give some language to, okay, I can feel this discomfort in my body. Sometimes even just discomfort, if it feels like you don't have a word for it, but just like, ooh, like it feels hard to get a full breath, or there's, knots in my stomach. That's a really good indication that you're feeling nervous about something, concerned, worried, whatever word you want to use. And again, if you can go into that, if it's with the other person, even just taking a deep breath, right? That's not super alarming to like breathe deeply, right? Like you don't have to be super dramatic about it, but just breathing. But doing it with intention, right? Of like, okay, I can tell that I'm getting a little bit like worked up about this. Like flooded is sometimes the language you'll use, where our emotions just kind of come crashing in, and it's really hard to see outside of it because we got into that emotional reactive space. And so before you get there, even just trying to regulate the fight, flight, freeze response that's kind of happening in you, because it creates this sensitivity to threat. In general, 6s, you have a stronger orientation towards threats. You pick them up in the field in a way, and it can be a real gift and a real skill, a strength that you bring into different environments as you're, anticipating what could go wrong and helping out in that. But the problem is threats are what trigger that fight, flight, freeze response in us. And because you have a sensitivity to threats, yours gets triggered easier. It's just what it is. And so, one, offering yourself some kindness in that, because you're just wired that way, right? In these moments that you talked about, like, oh, it escalates, and then I say this, and it goes back, and then I feel bad about it. There can be natural consequences to our actions that we need to go back and apologize about, but also just being gracious and kind to yourself in that, because your natural type structure just gets triggered into that stress response easier. It's just part of how you're made up. And so also, because that is true, having some practices where we use language of like grounding yourself. You're taking a deep breath, you're feeling your feet on the floor, you're present in the moment and trying to deregulate your nervous system, so that you can hear what they're saying fully, or you can articulate what you want to say fully, or you can say, I need a moment to come back to this conversation because I can tell I'm going to say something that's going to be unhelpful, and then the conversation will become about that, not what I'm actually concerned about. How does that sound as I share that with you?
No, that sounds like stuff that I have been trying to work on, but only quite recently. I again, like very fitting to my life experience and very real. I think I'm getting better at trying to, especially like stop conversations when I feel like it's getting to a place that's not good. And just being like, hey, I think that we're in a space right now where we're both feeling emotional and we are not going to be productive any longer. And it truly is going to be about that hurtful thing that I said out of emotions instead of the deeper like meaning of what we're trying to talk about. So that's a thing that, again, particularly my partner and I have been trying to work on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. When we talk about, those spaces when you're getting kind of like you can feel the emotion rising, or you can tell that it's kind of triggering this response in you. For 6s, often what's happening is when, fear is kind of the big word. You might use synonyms like worry, concern, anxiousness, restlessness, right? Some of these synonyms, because sometimes fear feels too big of a word. So it's okay if that does. But in that, when that comes, it's almost like your type structure is trying to fix the fear, worry, concern. And the invitation is actually to allow yourself to experience it so that you can process it and let it go. Because what happens is it's almost like, the monster underneath the bed, like you just keep pretending it's not there, or you just keep, shoving it down. And if you would just shed some light on it, if you would just kind of acknowledge in that moment, like, okay, I think I'm actually pretty concerned about this, or I feel really worried about this. I have a lot of fear around what could happen if XYZ continues on. And just acknowledging that and allowing yourself to feel that for a moment, feeling it physically in your body, taking a few deep breaths and allowing it to be there without fixing it, and even just sitting for a few minutes. That for sixes sounds hard. I can see even in your facial reactions. How does that sound as I share that with you?
It sounds hard, and I'm wondering if I'm like kind of starting to like ease myself into being able to do that. So what I've started doing is with some like close people in my life, I've been having I call them anxiety questions. And how I preface this to them is that, like, hey, I don't mean this like in a way that it really is like reflective of anything that you're doing. This is a reflection of fully my brain and like the random junk that it concocts on a daily basis. So I'm gonna ask you this question, like, do you have the space for it in this moment? And then and usually this question is only asked after like either a couple of hours or like actually a day of me sitting on that. And I'm just like, it's not going away. I need to address this with the other person. So I think like I'm trying to do that, but also it still sometimes like feels so big that I have to like speak about it to somebody.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I maybe I want to like try and do that more. Because I feel like I am trying to do what you're saying, but also still fixing the problem in asking the other person the question and being like, hey, I'm anxious about this thing. What do you think about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, okay. Yeah, that feels hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and again, it's okay to have others, in community as a sounding board, right? I mean, those in the dutiful stance, ones, twos, and sixes tend to have a bent towards external processing. Like sometimes it feels like there's too much internal chatter and you almost like need to synthesize it out loud. And also like sometimes when you're talking through it out loud, one of the disclaimers when I supervised people that were in the dutiful stance, I would just say like, I won't hold you to anything you said at the beginning. I'll talk through what you say at the end, because it's almost like this like raw thoughts that are happening, and then you get to the conclusion of like, okay, this is actually what I think, or this is actually how I feel about this. Not all the beginning jumble, right? But I think too, in that, giving yourself some space, even if it's okay to do it in community, but also doing it on your own. So what I mean by that is, we talk a lot about like you need to process your emotions, but then no one really explains what that means. And right. And so in that, processing your emotions really is just giving yourself some space to actually experience it non-judgmentally, not without trying to fix it or change it or get out of it. And so it's really allowing your emotions to be experienced. Otherwise, it just lingers in your subconscious and it builds up. It takes a toll on you. It can take a toll on you physically. But also, it's almost like, you keep pushing things down in the pressure cooker. And then when something happens, it totally boils over, even though the last thing wasn't even that big of a deal. But it's because all of this like fear has just been pushed down over time and time and time in this relationship, in this environment, in that work setting, or whatever it is. And so giving yourself some space without any other agenda, but just to experience the worry or the concern and just to breathe, right? So just sit there, to breathe. There's guided meditations that you can use that feels very impossible. Sometimes it's like helpful to have that support around it, which I can send you the one that I typically recommend for people. But because of that, it's allowing yourself to acknowledge, okay, I'm actually pretty concerned about this, sitting with it so that you can experience it. And then what happens, which is often surprising, is that if you allow yourself to experience it, it will dissipate on its own. The problem is we don't ever allow ourselves to experience it. We're just trying to fix it. Like we're just trying to get to the bottom of it. We're just trying to analyze it. And once that sensation is dissipated, once it doesn't feel so jangly, once it doesn't feel so heavy on your chest, then you can have some gentle inquiry about, okay, why? You know, not shaming or judging yourself, but being curious of like, okay, it feels like I am really concerned about this, but why? Does this remind me of something else that I've already experienced? Was it the language that they used that was actually really hurtful? Was it because I just didn't eat today and so I'm cranky? You know, like, so, right? So we can have some of these things that it's a non-judgmental observation. Because if we shame ourselves about feeling XYZ, then our type structure will even more suppress it and push it aside, or even project it onto other people. You know, for type sixes, it's often that we project our fear onto things because it feels easier to say that is causing fear, not I am afraid. And it's like your type structure is still trying to protect you. How does that lean in your experience as I talk through that?
I see where you're coming from, and for a lot of instances in where I am able to sit with the feeling, I definitely am like I understand what you're saying. I'm really able to identify like what is actually causing it, and then that's the best way to actually get to a resolution, right? But I think the thing that I struggle with a lot is still, ooh, that big word of shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just oh, I don't know why I'm getting very emotional in
Yeah.
this moment. Mm, yeah, I think
Yeah. So just giving yourself some space to
oof.
breathe through that, right? It's okay, right? When that emotion comes, our often thought is to restrict it, but just allow it, right? So just take a deep breath,
Yeah.
feel where it feels like it's activating in your body, right? The felt sensation of your emotion. Where do you feel it as you kind of take a deep breath?
Oh, yeah, the chest.
Yeah. Now, what emotion do you feel like is coming up for you as you kind of breathe into that sensation?
Um, I think just a lot of sadness and hurt from having been shamed for being emotional in certain situations, and then myself holding on to that shame
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just taking a few more deep breaths, just offering yourself the kindness of sitting with that. If it hurts, there's a lot of experiences of feeling shamed, and that hurts. It has a lasting effect. Yeah. Does it feel okay to sit with that emotion for a little bit, or does it feel like you're trying to move out of it? How does it feel right now as you sit into that?
Um, I think it feels okay to sit with, only, and I think only because like I've recently been identifying this like shame that has come along with a lot of my, honestly, just like everyday emotions that are not joy.
Yeah.
Um, and so like because I've like been noticing it a couple of times, especially in the past like couple of weeks, I think it feels a little bit easier to just um yeah, let it linger a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were sitting next to a friend that was experiencing what you're experiencing right now, so talking through that lingering feeling, the feeling that you've been able to articulate around shame, what are what are maybe some kind words or the compassion that you would offer to them in that space?
Oh, this is often a thing that I've tried to think about, and I think I have a really hard time of putting myself like in that friend space. I'd say that I'm quite a compassionate friend and I hope a quite loyal and supportive friend. But when I try and think of myself as that other person, it's so difficult for me to think about what I do.
Yeah.
Um, I which is not so great to have to say.
Yeah.
um, but it's quite hard for me to put myself in that situation.
Yeah. So instead of trying to put yourself in the friend's shoes, put yourself in your own shoes, okay? So you, as you're experiencing a friend that says, yeah, like there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of shame. What's even just a phrase that you might offer to comfort? Maybe the phrase is like, yeah, that's really hard. That's a lot to have experienced. That's a lot of hurt.
Um, yeah, I think that often recognizing that that's a big feeling is something that I do, and also just empathizing with the fact that they have had this big feeling and are like having to experience that. Um, I think um, maybe I don't know if this is good, bad, indifferent. But I think often some of the things that I say to other people of like that feels really hard and difficult and honestly like unfair that you are having to experience that. I think maybe the unfairness is a thing that I say to people because it's a thing that I want to hear for myself, that like almost kind of like saying like I'm sorry, like nobody should have to feel shame around having emotions, and so I'm sorry that that is a thing that you are having to deal with.
Yeah.
um yeah, maybe just that.
Yeah. So can you offer that to yourself in this moment? I'm sorry this is happening to you. This is unfair. No one should have to feel that way.
Yeah, I can hear those words, but it also and maybe this is just shame, but it also feels as if um like that's good and fine, but also why can't you just move through that?
Mm.
Like almost asking myself why the emotions are such big hangups for me.
Mm.
And I think and now that I'm saying that, that is actually just the shame talking
Yeah.
of like, why do you feel, yeah, why do you feel things in such a large manner?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you so emotional? And it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think you labeled it well though as shame, right? Because you're
Yeah.
just you're having an emotion that's just what it is, right? We don't get to fix or control that. It's just part of our human experience, and we're all wired differently. So different things cause that response. Different types have different awareness of it, right? Some types are feeling just as much emotion as you are. They're just completely oblivious because their type structure is causing them to be in denial, right? Like it just, it's going to catch up to them eventually once they start to realize it. And so it's just part of our experience. But I think I think you've labeled it well, of like that shame creeps in of why, not a curiosity, but a condemning why.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's fully not of like, oh, why, just why for the sake of why is this happening? It's like, why are you like this? Which has a very different feeling behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. In
And
that.
and almost again like, oh,
No,
sorry,
go
go
for
ahead.
it. You're okay.
Oh, I was just saying, again, leading to that, trying to fix it and like fix myself instead of just accepting that this is the status of who I am and the situation.
Yeah. And that's okay. You know, it's not just a like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
resigned to this, but it's also okay. It's okay that that hurt your feeling. Like it's okay that you're hurt. It's okay that you're disappointed, that you feel hopeless, that you feel sad, afraid, because that's just how you feel. And you can give yourself some space to process that so that it doesn't just build up and then it feels like, it gets into this flooded space where then you're not showing up in the way that you want to show up, right? Because it's so propelled by the unresolved feelings around things. But the problem is not those feelings. The problem was that they didn't get space to be honored. And so in that, the emotion is not the problem. It's okay. It's okay to have those things as they come up. Something happened in your experience, and a very normal human response is that you had an emotion around it, and giving yourself some space to experience it and process it, and also to offer yourself that kindness in it. Sometimes it's helpful, even as you are naming what you might offer to a friend. That's an easy way to offer yourself some compassion. But if it feels really hard to get there, even just like writing down the words you used of like, I'm sorry this is happening to you, this is really unfair, or that's really, this is hard, or, it's okay that you feel this way, whatever language you would use, almost even writing it down and reciting it to yourself is like a mantra. Sometimes that's part of how we can get into the practice of being compassionate rather than shaming our experience, because it doesn't do any good. We don't like get straight-laced and figure it out because we've been shamed so much that we finally figured out like that's just never true. I think
Yeah.
like it's never going to happen that way. What happens is that there's this gentle compassion that we can offer to ourselves. And so instead of our type structure trying to hide or reason out of our emotions, we just acknowledge them, we allow them to be, and we let them go in the way that they're intended to, rather than it just getting built up into just so much, just so much that causes this flooding or this emotional reaction or whatever it is that feels unhelpful when you're showing up in a conversation or in an environment. So how does that sound as I share that back?
It sounds okay. I think just maybe an uncomfortable thing that I noticed was that even you using the word like, and that's okay, I really don't like the word okay. And I am maybe unable to identify like why I'm having such a like strong reaction to that word.
Mm-hmm.
It it maybe like doesn't, I just don't feel like I want to use that about a situation, even though I know that that's supposed to be like such a neutral term of just like it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just have a lot of reluctance to that for some reason.
Yeah. Is there a
Um,
different
but
word that you might use that's kind of conveying the same like neutrality of like it is what it is, or what will be will be?
those are also two phrases that I have this like gut reaction to, and I don't know why. I think it maybe is because like my need to fix and control, because my reaction to it is what it is always that, well, I can probably actually do something about it. So yeah, I think maybe just like removing the like okay from it and just saying like it is maybe a
Mm.
more like neutral way for me to understand and like go about things until I can find a more neutral word. I don't know why I have such hangups about those phrases and about
Yeah.
okay as a word itself. But yes.
Yeah. But that's it. So it is. That could be the phrase of it is. and we're kind and compassionate towards ourselves because it is.
Yeah. I think hearing you say that actually feels a lot better. Just like in comparison. Yeah. Yeah, that feels a lot better to me.
Yeah. So I want to encourage you as you go into the next conversation, the next group of friends, the next work environment, whatever it is, that you start to notice this. It's almost like the heightened attention of concern, or you start to feel that jangly feeling, that tightness in your chest starts to escalate. A kindness that you can offer yourself as you acknowledge what you're experiencing can be this mantra of it is. It is. You know? And if you can give a name to the emotion you're feeling, that's good, you know. But if not, it's okay. It's okay to just acknowledge there's some discomfort of like, and it is, and it's there. It's there, and it is. As a way just to offer some space to experience that, and also de-escalating the judgment around it so that it's there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that feels good and manageable, I'd say. Yeah.
And as you go and practice this, it's a lifelong practice, right? It's not a like, oh, we figured it out with this one relationship and so now forever and ever, amen. It's a consistent showing up. It's a consistent bringing some awareness to our experience, whether that is how we're reacting to something, what it feels like in our body, what emotions coming up, and a consistent invitation to offer kindness to ourselves, non-judgmental observation of these things as we notice them, but also a kindness to ourselves as we notice the emotions that are coming up or the reaction that we're feeling towards something. It's a consistent practice. And I think sometimes I always want to offer that because we can have these like, okay, like this is good. And then we get into Wednesday and it's like, this is not good anymore. And so just this invitation that it's a consistent practice. It's a consistent choice to observe, to be aware of yourself, and a consistent choice to be compassionate towards your experience. Well, thank you so much for being in the coaching space with me. I really enjoy getting to be a part of your journey, even for just 30 minutes. That's a real gift for me. So thank you for being in this space.
Oh, and thank you so much for having me. This has been, quite an amazing way to start my day.
Hey, Enneagram friend. The best way to make this podcast more visible for others to learn about the Enneagram is by following or subscribing for free to the show. If you found this episode to be helpful in your personal growth, click the follow or subscribe icon to follow the podcast as more episodes are released. Thanks for being a part of my Enneagram community and listening to this episode. See you next time.